How many of you have been to a convention before? Ooh, just a few. How many of you are journalists? Okay, it's all off the record. Then how many of you are delegates to the convention? How many of you have been to the Q? How many of you are here just because you wanted to see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and figured why not stop to get something first? Yeah, okay, most of you. I want to start out by thanking the congressman and the general because they've done just terrific things, and I'll go through it in a minute. General Conway could have retired. He had a huge career in the Marine Corps, and a lot of military officers retire and they work on their golf games. But he decided, no, that he was going to travel the country, travel the world, and talk about the importance of non-military aspects of American foreign policy. So I want to start with you, General, and ask you, peace through strength. You and I won the Cold War because we were part of that generation. You actually won the Cold War. I wrote the speeches about winning the Cold War. But what do you see in today's world that in the post-Cold War world? I mean, how do you see the military, the diplomatic, and particularly the civilian assistance aspects of our victory?
Well, thank you for the question. And I'm honored to share the stage, KT, with you and the Congressman. And Liz, thanks for that very nice introduction. There was a picture of him earlier, but I would say that Ronald Reagan essentially won the Cold War, and we were his disciples in so doing. And I think he did so with several thoughts in mind. Now, he was of that great generation of World War II, and he thought that America was a special place, that America had a world leadership role that it really needed to manifest day in and day out on the global stage. And he thought that we needed to employ all elements of American power. He essentially rebuilt the military in the early 80s. And yet, if you look at his record over the 8 years, he seldom used it. He believed in diplomatic power. I think you can add to that economic power. And from my personal point of view, I think American business is an element of our power, as is American culture. And it's my view that he used all those things very effectively, sometimes quietly, sometimes in ways that we didn't even realize were taking place at the time. But he understood all elements of American power, and he used them very effectively. I think today that we are in need of a little better understanding and application of soft power. We still have the most powerful military in the world, but it's a different world. And we've seen our involvement. We've seen the difficulties associated with our involvement militarily, and in some cases the outright rejection of our involvement. So if we are going to be a world leader, and if one of those elements of American power needs to take precedence over the other, I think we're at a phase in the history of the world where it probably needs to be more this overt and sometimes covert diplomacy.
I want to turn to the Congressman. Congressman Emmer, you're a Midwestern Republican. Now, you could have taken the easy way out. The easy way out for a Midwestern Republican on foreign policy is to say, I'm an isolationist. That's what happened to the United States after the Vietnam War. We had the Vietnam syndrome. We withdrew from the world. President Reagan brought us back into the world. But here we are, deja vu all over again. But you've done something pretty gutsy. Why don't you explain to us how you see the world, having traveled to parts of the world that others do not?
Well, I appreciate that, KT. I don't know that it's gutsy. You do the right thing for the right reasons, and it should take care of itself. For me, I'm probably like a lot of people. Foreign affairs, foreign policy is a personal issue. It is a personal interest. But raising a family, I didn't get involved in the political side. I didn't run for a state legislative office until 2004, so I've only been at this for a little over a decade. When you serve at a state level, you are not involved in international foreign policy type issues. That's not what you're addressing.
Tell that to Barack Obama.
I'm not going to go there right now.
Okay.
But after my stint there, I had a statewide race that it didn't work out, an interview that I had with the state of Minnesota. It led me to a place that I never expected to be, which was a radio show, which I did for 2 years, 6 days a week, 3 hours every morning, which was not only about local issues, state issues, national issues, but starting to study and look at our foreign policy. When I got elected to Congress in 2015, when I got sworn in 2015, I was assigned to the Foreign Affairs Office, or Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, why is this important? Because Liz told you that I had a change of heart. She used the word skeptic. I would say something completely different. I was the guy on the radio that would often say, why is it that we are spending $1 over there when we should be spending that dollar here to build a road, a school, to take care of our own things in our own backyard? And then I had this amazing opportunity, is what I'll call it. Up until getting into Congress, my wife's been all over the world, but I'm the guy that a big trip was northern Minnesota to go fishing, right? I end up going to Asia and to Africa with Liz, and I was in Mexico. I've been in Cuba. I mean, many different places that I never expected to be. But the most transformational visit is why I think I was invited here today. Is because of that background. Liz took us to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and then to Nairobi, Kenya. And we got on a plane in Nairobi, and we flew, I want to say, a little over an hour into a place called El Dorado. El Dorado is primarily known for developing Olympic runners, long-distance runners. And we go up some 7,000 feet above sea level. And we're introduced to farmers. Now, there's a Minnesota connection as well. There's lots of Minnesota connections, but Land O'Lakes, one of our big companies, has a 40-year history in Africa, which I was not aware of. In fact, the CEO who's involved with this organization encouraged me to go on this trip for this very reason, I believe. I was introduced to a group of farmers who have started a dairy co-op. Right? They're stronger in number, they pool their product, they get a better price. They've developed this. They took us from the co-op, the site where they all bring their milk, to an individual farm, where a husband and wife showed us they're farming, this is amazing, 0.3 acres. And they had 1 or 2 animals, cows, and what we were shown is a USAID program where they are teaching these farmers how to grow food supplements for the animals. They showed us this small place where they not only live, but they also have a building framed in. I want to say it's 15 by 15 or 20 by 20. If you can picture it in your mind's eye, it's framed up with screen around it, a screen door on the side, a corrugated tin roof angled on the top. It's got these oversized bread racks, looks like they are, built inside with what look like oversized bread pans. Each pan is growing something that after 7 days, each pan takes 7 days, looks like a roll of sod. They roll it up, they drop it in the feed with for the animal. It's increased milk production by 30 to 70%. Now, you're thinking 0.3 acres, you're thinking 2 animals, 1 or 2 animals. That's not a big deal, is it? The owners told us, the husband and wife, that because of the co-op, because of this increase in milk production, they not only have generated enough funds to dig a 75-foot well on their property, a well, by the way, which not only serves their needs, but serves everybody around them. That's not even the biggest story that I got out of it. The biggest story I got out of it, KT, was when they said, and this has enabled us to send our 3 daughters to boarding school, right? And it was that created this epiphany for me where when I returned home, and I don't even know that Liz expected this, but I was interviewed about the trip. And I do come from a very conservative area, right? We're ex-urban, but more than 50% of the ground in my district is still in agricultural production. People don't have a connection necessarily. They don't realize it, maybe because ag needs trade, but they're so far removed from it. They're very concerned about what's happening in the world. There are a lot of people who would prefer that we pull back. And I made the comment, and I truly believe this, that it seems to me that $1 that we're spending today over there might save us millions, if not billions of dollars in the future that we will not have to spend on bombs, bullets, and God forbid, more of our own boots on the ground. And it really is this idea that it's more than just military strength. It's creating partners in the world that we do business with, allowing them to increase their standard of living. Because one, then they can do business with us. They can buy our products. They can pay for our services. But if we have these relationships, if we build them and they are strong, And by the way, we're not like some of the others around the planet who actually go in and harvest all the resources and remove them. The United States is viewed by these people that we've sat down with as being a partner, a potential partner. You build that partnership, and guess what? My view is you're a lot less likely to have conflict between two nations or peoples that are actually doing business together than you are if you take the attitude that we're here and they're over there. So it made a big difference to me, and I've advocated ever since I got back for, and by the way, I've also gone to those grassroots folks. I had 14 town halls in my district last year. It's something that's changed, I think, for members of Congress. Unfortunately, since an incident that occurred in Arizona a few years ago, fewer members of Congress do the one-on-one out in unsecure areas. And frankly, I think it's really important that we get back to it. When I do this, and I have people who come to me and say, why? You know, we should be spending that dollar here. I go through this process with them. More often than not, they look at me and they go, okay, I understand, thank you. So we've got to continue to express this and educate and get people out on the street to understand this is about our national security. This is about our economic success for the future. This is something that just can't be the United States. It's got to be global.
You know, you make a really good point of what the sort of residual effect is of American assistance in global development. But I want to, let me ask a question. Any of you seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War? Okay, so for those of you who haven't, Charlie Wilson, American congressman from Texas, played a key role in bringing down the Soviet Union. And it was because in the 1980s there was a war in Afghanistan. It was against the Soviet Union was fighting the Afghan Taliban, and we surreptitiously assisted the anti-Soviet forces. And fast forward to the end of that war in the middle 80s, and once the fighting had stopped, the Soviet Union was collapsing. There's a scene at the end of it where the diplomat is talking to the CIA guy, and Charlie Wilson, the congressman, who had gotten the military assistance to the fighters against the Soviet Union, they were all saying, okay, now what comes next? Now we're going to build schools, we're going to build hospitals, we're going to build a strong ally. But of course, we walked away. We learned that lesson better, though, at the end of the Cold War, when the collapse of the Iron Curtain, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and we indeed went and sent accountants and lawyers and doctors and helped build the former Soviet Union into countries which are now among our greatest allies. When you look at both of those experiences, which you were involved with, I mean, you were in the military at those times, in those years, what lessons do you take away from that?
Well, I'll offer two or three things, KT. One, we as Americans are very distant from those nations you describe, and sometimes we tend to lump them together, and that's a dangerous mistake. I mean, you can't say Afghan and Pakistan and mean it. You've got to look at the cultures that are different in the country. You can't lump all the Middle East nations together. Each one is separate with separate resources and separate styles of governments, leaderships, those types of things. So the first point I would make is understand, whether it's a military or a diplomatic involvement, the environment that you're in. And we need to do that very well. Secondly, I hearken back again to the time of Reagan and what we called initially the Weinberger Doctrine. Later,
I wrote that speech.
You did a good job then, because it later, Secretary Powell also sort of absorbed the thought process. And basically, ladies and gentlemen, what it says, if you're going to look at committing American forces, make sure that you have the will of the public behind you as you start to do that, and make sure that when you have to go, you go with an overwhelming kind of capability, so it's never a fair fight. And we will lose less young Marines and soldiers and airmen and sailors in the process. And I don't see that we followed through here, certainly in the case of the Afghan situation, like we should have. But maybe the most important thing is that we need to talk early on about what we in the military call end state. And end state is that environment that you're attempting to create, either through military or diplomatic means. And we need to understand what that's all about. Can the region live with that? And it tells you when you've been successful. It tells you when you've won. And a failure to do that leads to a meandering kind of policy that takes you whatever, wherever the week's events take you. And I just don't know that putting all those things together, that we looked at in-state properly, in Afghanistan. Perhaps you can argue we did after the Cold War. But much of that end state will not involve the military. It'll involve, again, these elements of our economic and diplomatic power to try to make sure that we leave wherever we have been in the best possible conditions to sort of rejoin the global order.
Congressman, you had mentioned earlier in your remarks about $1 spent for aid, and when you explain it to the people of Minnesota, they get it. They understand why it's a very important thing to do for American national security. But I can't ignore the fact that you're from a state where there is a very large immigrant population. In fact, a large Somali immigrant population. And we look at that and the potential threat of radical Islam coming from immigrants, coming from refugees, and also the ties back. How do you sort of square that circle when you see there's a terrorist issue, but there's also a way to prevent that terrorist issue from happening?
Well, you've got to be proactive. I mean, Minnesota is ground zero, obviously, for some of the recruitment that we've seen within our country. And I'll just tell you what I have done. How's that, KT?
Works for me.
Minnesota, as KT points out, it does have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia. In fact, St. Cloud, which is the largest city in the district that I represent in central Minnesota, per capita has the highest number. Minneapolis, for those that may know, has the greatest number of the population. But per capita, in a county that has roughly 125,000 people, there are almost 15,000 Somali residents today, and that's growing. So what do? We're faced with, when I see it, and knowing about these global issues, right? We're faced with people in elected office who refuse to want to even talk about the issue because it's so hyper partisan. It's got the combinations of religious elements and isolationist elements, and I mean it's very complicated. But this is what isn't complicated for me. I think we've got far too many elected officials that would rather double down on the fear, double down on the potential hatred or the division, because you know what? That gets people all jazzed up and it gets the votes, it turns them out. The problem is you're exacerbating the problem. What we did, looking at this situation and knowing that the studies show that if you're 18 to 34, 35 years old, and typically male, although we're seeing more and more females, and you do not feel connected to a community, you do not see opportunity, you do not have hope for your future, you are the most apt to be recruited and radicalized. So what do? We created, with my office in Washington, the Somalia, not Somali, Somalia caucus. And a lot of people think we come up with all these original ideas. I actually stole this from the state party of Minnesota, the state Republican Party. Because one of my predecessors, who had run for a Secretary of State position in Minnesota, had created what he called an in-reach program, but it was outreach to these new communities within Minneapolis primarily. And he called it the Somalia Caucus. We took this because there are three things. One, you really have to solve the problem in Somalia through diplomatic and other means. You need to stabilize where these people are coming from, because to just say that it's all right for everybody to move and how many are you going to take and how many are you going to take, it's not solving the problem for the long term. So the first thing is building a group within Congress to look at how we would approach stabilizing Somalia so that people don't feel as though they have to flee to raise their family and achieve their dreams. That's number one. Number two, it's about stopping the flow of money to the bad guys. Right? You've got to do that in order, but we don't want to stop people who come to this country who, through their hard work, their initiative, are earning money to support their families. So it's another very difficult issue. The third one is the one that I think goes to KT's question the most, and that's raising awareness. Starting to bring these communities in. And from my perspective, yes, you've got imams who are coming over, you've got other elders, as they are called within these communities, who are not necessarily interested in assimilation into the American culture, into our communities. They want to build their own communities based on what they've come from. But you've got these young people that there is a huge conflict going on, and we've actually been part of this is we witness how the young people want to start their lives, want to be Americans. They respect their culture, they respect where they come from, but they also want to be part of the process, the democratic process in this country. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to develop just like all other young people in their communities. We're having a problem, though, in that we've got some long-time residents who, whether it's xenophobia or whatever it might be, fear actually of the unknown is what I think it is. They say there isn't assimilation, so they are actually prone to push the young people away at the same time. And our goal, KT, the way I think you deal with this at home, is you have to bring those kids in close. You got to wrap your arms around them. You got to bring them in. You got to help them develop. You got to help them achieve their dreams so they do not feel as though they're disconnected, so they have hope for their future and they see the opportunity. Because if we do that, we can prevent the Brussels, the Paris experience, et cetera. And at the same time, then, with the general's background and our military and our State Department, have an articulated, very clear strategy as to how we are going to stabilize, how we can help stabilize these countries around the world.
And can I take just 1 minute to compliment the Congressman's response? We talked about in-state. There's also pre-state, and it's just what he described. We have another term in the military as we look around the globe for hotspots that's called ungoverned spaces. And that's where people don't live in large numbers, where the law and order institutions don't reach, where agriculture doesn't abound. And you can, if you're visualizing something, just think wasteland. But that's prime terrain to the people who would come together and form unions around those who are dissatisfied, use as training areas and so forth, and they're very dangerous places to the rest of civilization. And so that's the place that we would advocate that our State Department pay particular attention, that U.S. aid groups and NGOs go into, admittedly at some hazard, to try to strengthen those institutions and inspire those people to do better. American agriculture is another tremendous element of American power. So to help those farmers understand better how to cultivate semi-arid lands and that type of thing can make that insurgency look much less appealing. And in the end, possibly, again, avoid what might be the commitment of U.S. and coalition forces to fight a burgeoning insurgency in those areas.
I'm going to go back to the movies, okay? Now, there's a movie called It's a Wonderful Life. Do any of you get stuck watching it with your parents every Christmas? I make my kids do that, too.
I watch it. I don't
He
get
watches
stuck.
it all the time,
Yeah.
probably. He's a good Republican
I
congressman
cry
from
when I
Minnesota. Okay, but in the movie, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's an old 1930s movie, and Jimmy Stewart plays George Bailey, who feels that he's been a complete failure in his life, and he's going to commit suicide on Christmas Eve. The guardian angel comes down from heaven, and he shows George what the world, what his town would have been like, what his life would have been like, what his family, what his friends, what his community would have been like had he not been alive, had never been alive. And at the end of the movie, of course, well, it ends really well. George Bailey realizes what a great guy he is, and his family loves him. So let me turn to the congressman and say, what does America look like without, what does the world look like without America's leadership? You're the next generation. When you look not only back but forward, what's America's role?
Well, I think in order to look forward, you do need to look backward.
Well done.
And it's if we don't learn from history, right, we're bound to repeat it. This is a conversation that I have with the grassroots folks that would challenge what I've come back to tell them. This is what I'm working for and why. Every time the United States of America in our history has withdrawn from the world, bad things have happened. I mean, this movement before World War I, try before World War II, every time we take the attitude, and I think the general can, this is where I was saying beforehand, I'm no military expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be one. We leave that to the experts. But it seems to me that when people hear we are supposed to be involved in the world, there's a disconnect. They seem to think at the street level, that means just military intervention. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about America's influence in the world. And I think looking back, we see what happens when we withdraw. So going forward, really, we need to have and this is what's been missing, and I'll turn it over to the general because he's been watching this for a long time and working for the administrations before this one. We are missing an easily to articulate, clearly stated American foreign policy. What is our goal? What are we trying to do? And what's our objective? And how do we propose to get there? And I think that's going to be the challenge for the next administration and the people that are going to be advising it.
Okay, well, let's just flash forward to say we're now in January, or actually maybe let's flash forward to mid-November. President Trump, who we know likes military leaders, is going to have one of his staff is going to put in front of him an article from Time magazine, and let me quote. National security challenges have become more resistant to bullets. 21st century problems require fine scalpels, and the military is a broadsword. We can start by better resourcing and strengthening our own institutions. The State Department, the Peace Corps, USAID are the front lines of keeping our country safe, but they are underfunded and undermanned. So when President Trump calls you and says, hey, General, somebody told me you wrote something in Time magazine. I probably saw you on TV talking about it. So what do we need going forward to keep the peace and win the peace, and as you have said many times, prevent the conflict from happening?
Well, I first of all think that we must have a powerful military. No question about that. And you know, if Mr. Trump doesn't already, I would encourage him to read the writings of Teddy Roosevelt. Carry a big stick, but speak softly. And speak in other ways.
He might like the first part. I'm not sure about the second part.
I think it's inherently there. And it's symbolic to say that there are other ways than just wielding that big stick. And I sense that that's more his approach, his intended approach, perhaps, even than the other side at this point. I sense from him that any involvement would be a very studied involvement, and that it would be after other approaches, deal-making, if you will, may not have borne fruit. So I do believe that there's plenty of money there. And what's appealing to me is that the idea of a businessman running our country for a while can take a look at the huge amounts of money as a nation. We throw at education. We throw at health care. We throw at programs for the poor. And frankly, we throw at the military. And we need to get efficiencies from those monies. And and when that's done, even in the face of our incredible national debt, I think there's money to be had to spend wisely, to try to aid and assist where we can, extend relationships and make good deals where we can. And again, just be prepared to use the military, but use it very wisely and only when America's vital national interests are involved.
All right, so the second phone call President Trump is going to make after he asks the general, what should we do, he's going to call the congressman and say, how are we going to pay for it? So why don't you talk to us, Congressman Emmer, and wrap it up for us about the role that Congress is going to play in this new Trump administration and delivering on the things that you've talked about with great passion and great effectiveness.
Well, I think it's kind of building off what the general just said. I think it's about who he surrounds himself with. It's going to be surround yourself with the best people you can, and then Congress, the role of Congress. And I think he showed us within the past week and a half, that he is going to surround himself with people that fill areas that he may not be an expert at. And why do I say that? Because do I think Donald Trump, our nominee, is a wizard when it comes to the letter of the Constitution? No, probably not. He knows how to look it up like most Americans, but can he cite it verse and letter? No, I doubt it. But you know what? I think Mike Pence is pretty good at that. Second, is Donald Trump our nominee? Is he an expert in the art of the legislative process and how you would surround yourself with the best advisors? I would hope General Conway would be one that would be considered, that you've got these people that are going to advise you on this is the objective and these are the different courses of action to reach that objective. But now once you do that, how are you going to get the buy-in, right? How are you going to negotiate the legislative process? Donald Trump has no experience with that, but he showed us by appointing or selecting Mike Pence as his running mate that he knows that because he got somebody who actually does have that experience and does have that understanding. This is going to be the future for me, KT. The success of the next administration when Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and I do think that's more likely than not because of the issue we're talking about right now. The issues for the United States of America today are security, international and domestic, and our economy. Having a businessman doesn't mean it's suddenly going to be all roses and daisies by any means. But I think the American public, what you're seeing is they need something different. And for us to be successful, he's going to have to surround himself with people who know what he does not know. And he's going to have to take their advice and then negotiate the legislative process. And Congress, Democrats and Republicans, have got to both get on board and understand that this is not a partisan issue. Safety and security is an American issue. This is something we all need to be invested in, even if we might have little different ways of getting there.
I just want to close out by saying that this topic of civilian assistance, development assistance going hand in hand with the military might of the United States has been sufficiently taken seriously that a couple of Donald Trump's national security team is here. Now, I'm not going to point them out for fear everybody's going to stampede and either put a mic in their face or a resume in their hands. But I do want to thank you both very much for having shown the way in a very wise and deliberate conversation about, as you said, General, all of the elements of America's national power, including the civilian element. Thank you all very much. Have a terrific time. Don't stay out too late because you have one more day.